So you just downloaded Path of Exile and you're eager to start playing? There's a couple of settings that you should adjust in the game options in order for you to have the best experience playing going into Path of Exile. Hi guys, my name is CatmasterOP and this is a freshly booted version of Path of Exile. I deleted my config file and we're gonna go step by step through the options and I'm gonna show you what the different options do. So if you just installed Path of Exile, you probably want to make sure that it's running on the right screen. Here you can select the different display adapters that are connected. And yeah, that's what I did already, otherwise I couldn't be recording this footage. Other than that, everything is default right now. I would recommend leaving the graphics settings at default at first. The sound will leave alone for now. As a new player, you should experience the game with the music. Also, don't mute when in background, otherwise you'll miss sounds when you're tapped out, like zombies hitting you or people sending you trade requests, stuff like that. The most important settings that you can find are in user interface and input. So in user interface, you want to make sure you have the right language. You want to set the networking mode to lockstep if you have a consistent low ping. The difference is that in lockstep, before you take a step in your game client, the server will have to confirm that that's a legal move. Whereas in predictive, your client will pretend it's a legal move because the client can, be pretty sure about whether it's a legal move or not. It's just not 100% all the time right, what the client calls. And then lets you take the movement before the server confirms so that the synchronization happens afterwards. Whereas in lockstep, it's completely synchronized, which can lead to bad stutters if the connection is not the best, or if you're killing a lot of monsters at the same time, leading to a lot of calculations needing to be compared between client and server. Screen shake is terrible. I would recommend to switch it off. It makes me nauseous. It makes me feel like something's not right with the game. But then again, I'm used to playing it without screen shake for years, so you may enjoy it. It feels a ton better in my opinion. As a new player, you probably want to keep on the quest tracking. I personally don't like it because it occupies space on the screen. You want to be able to show the corner map. This means that whenever you don't have the overlay map on, you have the map in the corner instead. Auto sender map is a feature that I like because it allows you to recenter the map by switching it on and off, the overlay map that is. Landscape transparency and map transparency are sliders with which you can change the appearance of the map. That's something that you have to decide for yourself, how you want to see the map. The map zoom you can change in-game anyway, so you don't need to adjust that slider. In a similar fashion, you shouldn't worry about always highlight. You generally want highlighting on because it shows you labels of items that you can interact with, but since there's a keybind for this option, you don't need to adjust it here. So I made the cursor a little bit smaller so that it doesn't overlap with the description. Always show sockets is something I always recommend to people. You always want to show the sockets because you want to see your sockets without pressing the highlight key. It's nice to be able to enjoy the 2D art, but for practical gameplay, always show sockets. Key pickup is very important in my opinion. If there's a lot of loot on the ground and a lot of loot shown by your item filter, you can accidentally pick it up instead of walking where you want to walk. So you definitely want to use the highlight key in order to be able to pick up things. Full descriptions is on by default and should be. Show life and mana levels will allow you to read the exact values of your life and mana level on top of the orbs rather than just having the percentage display. Very important because you don't want to always open the character tab in order to see how many thousand life you have, and you want to be able to see, how much life you have at any given point. It's just impractical to not have these values shown all the time. Show flask buffs is off by default, and I would recommend to keep this off because they implemented a function with which you can see which flask is active on the flask itself while it's equipped on your build. Aura icon I also recommend to not switch on. This is because of visual clutter. These would be shown on the top of the screen where your buff bar is, but the buff bar is already kind of overloaded. That's why these are optional, and it's better to play the game without these shown. You should set corpse targeting to when key held and define a key for this in the keybinds, so that you won't accidentally hover over corpses when you have a ability on the bar that can target corpses. The chat options you can change in-game anytime as well, so you might want to not have global chat on the first time you play the game. I recommend that for sure. Guild chat, you won't have a guild when you first start the game, but you can leave it on. That you know, there will be no downside to that. I definitely recommend timestamps in chat. What you definitely want to have on is mini life bars on enemies. This way you'll be able to always see how much life enemies have left after you first attacked them. If you don't have this on, you always have to hover enemies in order to see how much life they have left. Playing the game without the mini life bars on enemies is just very impractical. Mini life bars on allies are not as important because you don't always play a summoner, but if you play a summoner, I would recommend you switch these on as well early on. But later on when you're in maps, you might want to switch them off, because if you have a lot of summons, there will be a lot of life bars flying around. If you come from a game like League of Legends, where there's always a life bar on top of your character, and that's something that you're conditioned to paying attention to, then I recommend you switch on the mini life bar on top of your character. I tried it and it just doesn't work for me. My eyes will always like check the globes on the side rather than the mini life bar on top of me. I never paid attention to it, I didn't learn it, so I switched it off again because visual clutter. Now, if you need a clock while playing because you're easily overextending, you're someone who forgets real life commitments, then definitely switch on the clock. That way on top of your flasks you will always see how late it is. I personally like to output the character dialogue to chat because that allows me, similar to subtitles, to read what the characters say in game. English is not my native language. I don't know every single word that people use, especially in these fantasy worlds, so I want to be able to read it up if I don't get it. Advanced mod descriptions is probably the single most important thing that a new player needs to activate here, and it's mind-boggling how this has not been made a default option, seeing that this does not change anything about the game unless you press the highlight key while hovering an item. So it doesn't really bother anyone unless they're looking for it, and then if it's not on, they can't find it. So definitely switch this on. With advanced mod descriptions activated, you can see on items whether mods are prefix or suffix and which mod has which name and what tier it is relative to the other tiers of mods that exist. I personally switch off auto equip because it annoys the hell out of me if I pick up an item and my character automatically equips it. But let's be real, most of the times you don't run with empty slots on your character. Most of the time you have something equipped. So it only really matters early game or in builds like Facebreaker where you want to be unarmed. I definitely switch this off. It means that you have to equip the first weapons yourself, but it's also important to learn that, right? It's important to learn how to equip things. So definitely don't auto-equip. I personally like to remove the mouse wheel zoom because I will just accidentally scroll the wheel or scroll it when I'm trying to scroll in these options or in the chat, and then I'll scroll in and out on the character, and sometimes like I play with the character zoomed in for like half an hour and I just notice in the end, oh shit, I was zoomed in, I didn't even see the full, just switch it off. I would also confine the mouse to the window. This means that your mouse cursor won't be able to exit the Path of Exile window unless you press Alt-Tab beforehand. So that's pretty good because you don't really want to accidentally click somewhere else but in the game, right? I personally don't like the support gem utility pop-up. If you already know the game, if you're familiar, I would switch that off, but for new players, keep this on. Loot allocation, this is how the game handles loot drops when you're in a party. So free for all means everyone can grab it. Short allocation means it's allocated to one player, but only for a short duration, and afterwards it's free for all. Permanent allocation means that it will be permanently allocated for one player only, which means everyone can see it, but no one but that one person can grab it, unless that one person exits the area. Level downscaling is on by default. If you want to learn more about level downscaling, read this little description. Basically, this just means you can play with your friends without them preventing you from gaining experience when they're much higher level. But it also means that they are at a real risk even if they're a much higher level than the content that they're helping you with, because they're downscaled. Be aware of it. I don't play a lot in parties, so I'm not sure what's the better option here, but be aware that level downscaling does exist. The chat settings are again something that you have to adjust according to your preference. I recommend leaving it like that, and if you think it needs adjusting, then come back to the options later and adjust it. And this part is really important. Item filters. Now per default, I think there is one default item filter installed, but you really want to make yourself a custom item filter for Path of Exile, which is not as hard as it sounds. There is a very nice German content creator called Neversing who made the famous Neversing filter. Neversing was one of the first people to write a very sophisticated item filter with the scripting language. It's not a scripting language, it's more like a style sheet language. Anyway, Neversing was one of the first people to really put a lot of work into it and optimize the code and keep it updated for every league. And eventually Neversing designed a website called filterblade.xyz, which we'll go to right now. No way, the video is way too long already. I tell you what, we gonna do that in the next video. I thank you guys all for watching and for liking, and leave in the comments down below if there's any tricks or settings that you would recommend for a new player, and I'll see you in the next video.